Hello, Print Society. Jay here with Elegant Edits. Today we will be setting up Acrorip 10 and 11. Both of these versions are very similar. So if you can set up 10, you can set up 11. So first, you want to go to the link that was included with your USB dongle, and then you want to install whichever version of Acrorip you have. Secondly, you'll be able to actually launch the software. They have this anti-piracy warning due to uh, just the people that were trying to pirate it overseas and sell them at $30 and $40. So that's beside the point. So if you are launching this for the first time, you will have generic values in all of these settings. So the first thing you'll want to do is click on the Layout tab, and you'll want to select the type of film that you'll be using. So we are using 17-inch film, so we have this set up. Next, you want to actually create a template for that. So when you go to View, you want to ensure that Show Template is checked first, and then you want to click on View again and go to Template, and then the Start X and Start Y axis, you want to ensure that you make that value as low as possible. That way you get the most out of the margins on the X and Y axis of the film. Next here, your width will be set to whichever size of width that your film is, and you can set the height to anything you want. In particular, I like to use or print 2-yard runs, so we have it at 72 inches here. Now, if you don't see inches here, I'll show you how to change that here in a second. But once you select these values, you'll actually go down to Save, and you can save these dimensions as anything you want. I like to delete this, that way I can see the numbers first. And so this is how I would save this template. And you would hit Save, next hit Apply, and OK. Now, if you don't see those values, you can go to File, Unit, and change it to inches. Sometimes it's preset to centimeters. And then you would create your template. Next, what we would want to do is change the output position to 0 values, because that will change as you import your image. This is the repeat function. You can change this to whatever you want. And the X and Y spacing, is related to how far over you want this spaced out, the distance in between either image. So you just have to play around with that until you get it the way that you want, but make sure that it fits within the template, or you'll get overspray inside of your printer, and we don't want that. Okay, so the next tab we want to go to is our printer tab. So you will want to actually select the driver that you'll be using. So in this case, we're using a Epson 9890. So it's similar to the P6000 driver, but whichever version you're using, if you're using a 7890, you can still use the SureColor SC Pro 6000 or P6000. And some drivers work with others. If you wanted to use the 7890 driver, it's right there if you're using that 7900 series. Now, you also want to select your port. Now, your printer should be listed here. Now, it won't be under the same USB port, and the way to determine whether or not your printer is installed, you would actually go to Control Panel. I have it as a shortcut here, but if you don't know how to do that, you can just type in Control Panel. In your Windows search, it'll pull it up. Next, you want to go to View Devices and Printers, Printers and Scanners, and you should see your list of printers there. And if you don't, that means you would need to actually go and open your browser, download the driver, and ensure that the printer is actually installed there. So once you select your printer model here and you ensure the port is there, we usually like to keep this check paper size turned off. Common resolutions are 1440 by 1440 for both color and white. Your printer may be able to print a higher resolution. I do not recommend putting your white resolution any higher than 1440 by 1440 because the RIP tends to crash, or you'll get a color empty or a white empty error that pops up. So there's no need to go beyond this resolution. Sometimes you can go with a lower resolution. You could get away with 1440 by 720 DPI, or dots per inch. You can utilize this, but keep that white resolution at 1440 by 1440. Now, a reason why you may want to lower this resolution would be if you just don't need to lay down as much ink and you don't lose any sort of fidelity in the image. You could do that. Now, we are using a roll feed. If you're using a smaller converted desktop Epson printer, you'll actually want to choose sheet. But the 9890 is a roll feed printer, so we selected roll feed. You want to keep the speed at bidirectional, and the best way to explain this is as the carriage is moving from left to right side, uh, it does a spray motion. So when the nozzles are jetting, when it goes from left to right, bidirection goes spray from left to right, and then spray from right to left. So unidirectional means that it's going to do one spray per pass of the carriage. So what that would look like is from right to left, spray, from left to right, nothing, from right to left, spray, from left to right, nothing, and vice versa. So we like to go with bidirectional. That way you get a faster print speed, because unidirectional only does one spray per pass of the carriage back and forth. So that means it would slow your print speed down. So that's the short version of this. We like bidirectional. You want to keep the wave off. The dot size will vary based on your printer model. Some people like to use medium, medium and large. I like to use mix for both. You'll just have to experiment with that. But a good baseline is to select mixed on that. We can move on to the color tab here. A good, well, let's start with the ink channel configuration. Now, this will vary based on where you have your DTF ink in your carts. So these represent all of the slots on your printer with the exception of matte and photo black. So matte and the matte, usually on the converted desktop printers, matte and photo black share the same line, but they have separate carts. So you will want to figure out which one you want to use. I would put your DTF ink in the photo black channel because the printer defaults to photo black. Ensure that you select the photo paper option on the printer so that they match, because if you don't, if you have a larger format converted Epson printer, it will actually do a black ink swap or a black ink change, and you don't want that. So wherever your matte or photo black cart rests, that would only be one placeholder for this, if that makes sense. So on the 7890, we have the 5 colors, but we have this turned off on ours because we aren't using either the photo or the black channel on ours. So once you set up your configuration and it matches, you'll want to hit save so that it can create a preset there for you. And then hit OK. Now that your ink channel configuration is set up, you can move down to the ink limit percentages. And how this works is the higher this number, the higher the value is here, the more ink is going to lay down. So essentially, the higher this number, the darker your colors will be. So with that, you would actually want to ensure that you start at a lower percentage, especially if you're trying to mimic these neon-esque or fluorescent colors. You'll want to print this at a lower color ink limit percentage. Your white ink limit percentage, a good baseline for most printers would be 45 to 50. On the smaller Epson desktop converted printers, you may need to put it at 80, 90%, but rarely will you have to put that at 100%. But just, I would say, to start, 35 for your color ink limit percentage, and maybe 45 or 50 for your white ink limit percentage. And then if you see that your whites are runny or it's too heavy, then you can dial that back a little bit to ensure that your transfers are nice and soft. Now the brightness, if you're using, you can leave the brightness at 100%, but on the lighter colors, again, when you're trying to mimic those colors, which is nearly impossible for CMYK printing without adding fluorescent inks, you can still try to hike the brightness or the contrast up to raise those values up a bit more just to get that. But by default, it's safe to keep it at 100% on those values. Now, your ICC profile selection, the RIP comes with these by default, except for our Pop DTF profile that we have had prepared for the P5000. If you have purchased an ICC profile and you want to add it to this list, I'll show you how to do that in a second, but you can just keep this off and just see how close your colors can get without utilizing it, because these profiles will actually work best with the printer model and the ink set that the profiler created them for. But sometimes you can get lucky. Now, if you'd like to know how to install that ICC profile, I can actually show you here. So you would download that file and you would need to access the C drive. If you're using Acrorip 11, you'll actually select the DTF RIP folder. If you're using Acrorip 10, you'll select the DTG RIP folder. We're using Acrorip 10, so I'll select the DTG RIP folder. And next you'll want to go down to Profile and CMYK. And this is where you'll copy and paste, or you can just download this directly from your browser or your email, or however the profiler sent the profile to you, and download that directly into this folder and just relaunch Acrorip and you'll see it listed here. Now, once you select your ICC profile, if you want to do that, you have what's called rendering intent, or they just have intent, but it's technically called rendering intent. And you have perceptual, relative, colorimetric, saturation. I won't get too far into this, but most people would like perceptual because it's going to try and print the image as close to what you see on screen as possible, but we aren't using OEM inks, we're using DTF inks, so that opens up a whole can of worms. We have it set to saturation just due to this image that has the neon colors that we were trying to print here, and you just select OK. It's best to shrink your image down and then reprint it and just adjust these settings, and as it comes off of the printer, go ahead and take a Sharpie and you can mark the transfer to remind yourself of what your ink limit percentages were at in case you want to print another image at a later time and you'd like to get those exact settings dialed in. Okay, moving on. So the last tab that we would actually need to check is the white layer generation drop down, and just ensure this says 100% white under any color pixel. You can also experiment with the gradient white under any color pixel, and what that would do is actually only lay down white as needed in the image. So the darker colors, it wouldn't lay down any white, such as black, and as the colors get lighter and lighter, it'll lay down as much white as possible to maintain that vibrancy. So with this image, in the eye of this Highlander calf, there wouldn't be any DTF ink on these areas, but you would see it everywhere on the belly and the back portion of the torso here, but around the cheek you wouldn't see much DTF ink either. So that's how gradient works. Most people do 100% white, but gradient allows for a softer hand feel at the end. So moving on, this is the area for what we call the choke. So you want to choose a value higher than 0, definitely. But on all 4 of these represent the actual edges of the image or the design. So the higher these values are, what it's going to do is tuck the white layer behind, almost in a negative way. So that's why it says decrease by X amount of pixels, because it will actually tuck the white behind the color layer so that you don't get a white outline around your image. So if you have it set to 0, chances are when you go to print this image, you may see a little bit of white peeking behind the colors when you go to press it to a shirt. But with the value of 1 pixel, that means it's going to decrease the white layer by 1 pixel inward behind or atop the color layer. So that hides the white. Some people like 2 pixels. I like 1. Now, where this is more uh, where it gets more technical is when you have really small lettering that you're printing. So let's say you have a polo graphic and it has very fine text. You don't want the choke to be set too high, because if the text is only 2 pixels wide and you go in 1 pixel on either side, you essentially have no white ink behind those tiny letters. And your white ink contains latex, so that's where we get more of our most of our stretchability in the transfer from. So that's just, I like to give more information than less information here. So this is pretty much all you need, with the exception of a couple of things. So ensure that you right click and you mirror the image every time you import it. It's a good measure. You can also hit justify and set to horizontal center, and this will actually set the design in the exact center. Or you can go top left if you've actually set the dimensions evenly. And you actually want to select the print button. Now it opens up this dialog box here. If you're printing a white only image with no color in it, you will want to make sure that both of these boxes are selected or unticked here, and that is the print color first and the print white plus color check boxes here. So if you're printing a color image, as we have here with the Highlander calf, you would actually need to ensure that both of these checkboxes are selected, or you won't get a drop of white ink to be, it'll just print solid, well, sometimes it'll print solid white depending on which one is unchecked, or you'll get an error message that says color empty, or you'll get an error message that says white empty. So if you're printing a color image, both of these should be selected. If you're printing a white only image, both of these should be deselected. And now you're ready to print. And if your port selection is configured correctly, all of your settings are configured correctly, if your ink channels are configured correctly, you should have a pretty decent image. And then you would just need to adjust the settings according to the actual image itself. Now, if you'd like to open a brand new design or image or import that within Acrorip, and you want to keep these exact settings, the proper way to do that would be to right click and hit open, and then you could select any one of these other Highlander calves, so or your image. So you could do that way, and when you open it, it would actually be displayed with the same exact settings as we had before. So I would advise you to not go to file and open, but rather right click and hit open, and then you have your tray of previous jobs here. Now, the way to save your settings is not to select, to close it out this way. Whenever you exit Acrorip, you would actually go to File and Exit. When you go to File and Exit, it will save all of your jobs and all of your settings. If the RIP were to ever crash, sometimes you'll experience where your jobs will be removed, your most recent jobs since the last time you selected File and Exit. I hope this video has helped you in some way. If it has, please share it. like and subscribe. If you have purchased Acrorip from my company, Pop DTF, I really appreciate your support. Let us know if we can help, and we will schedule that time. Now, I will be coming out with the masterclass here pretty soon where we will do all of these things in detail, and we will also discuss image editing and touching up photos, how to build a gang sheet, what is a raster image, what is a vector image, and so on. So thank you, and as always, stay elegant, Print Society.